We've got our panelists standing by, though. Colin McDonald for the Liberals, Marit Stiles for the NDP, and Jeff Norquay for the Conservatives. Marit, let me start with you on this one. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's quite shocking, actually. I think many Canadians, like myself, woke up this morning and were shocked to hear that there were more ministers in a similar situation to our Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. The government has had weeks now to address this, and they could have come clean about that much earlier. The fact that they refuse to give the names of the ministers now is somewhat concerning. And I think it's really going to continue to be an issue for this government. Clearly, it calls into question now any decisions that any cabinet minister makes, anything this government pushes forward, because any decision that's made could in some way benefit the companies of those particular cabinet ministers. Who are they? Canadians have a right to know.
Jeff, what's your read on this story?
Well, this continues to be a slow-motion train wreck for the government. You know, conflict of interest rules for cabinet ministers have been around in this country for, what, 40, 50, maybe 60 years now. They're very simple. When a minister is sworn in, he or she must have gotten rid of her assets or his assets through sale or put them in a blind trust. Option A, option B, take your pick, but you must do one. Now it comes out that Mr. Morneau and several other cabinet colleagues didn't obey that rule. They got by on a loophole, which said that if their assets were distantly held by a company and not in their own name, they could get away with it. I place some blame, too, I think, on Mary Dawson, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, because I think she could have been quite a bit more attuned to telling ministers, not only must you obey the actual law, but the spirit of the law as well, and clearly she did not.
What's your read on this, Colin, from a Liberal point of view here? We know Bill Morneau has been under fire for more than 2 weeks over this. Now there are others.
So I think amidst the shock and awe and the claims of the rules being clear for the last 50 years, we should remind viewers that all the ministers that are under discussion right now have in fact followed the rules as the Ethics Commissioner described them to them. Ministers, MPs, they rely on the office of the Ethics Commissioner to provide them with advice, to provide them with counsel, and to instruct them on the best way to move forward. We're acting as though these folks have acted outside of the rules. There's no indication that that is in fact the case, and I think people should remember that.
Marit?
Well, I think that, this is a government that it has said they were going to hold their own ministers to a higher accountability and standard. And so I don't think it's fair at all to say that there's no issue here, that this is how it's always been done. And, the fact is, this is a government that's purporting to make some changes. And then when their own ministers are not living up to that standard of accountability, it's a problem. I'm going to give you one example here of how it's going to cast a pallor around this government. For example, Bill C-62, the finance minister's own company, Morneau Chapelle, could benefit under that legislation, right? It talks about it's around pensions and human resources issues, and these things could benefit that company. So to say now that he's going to, spend some guilt money in giving away some of those profits that he may have made in the sale of that company to charities, I just don't think it's going to fly for a lot of folks who are really struggling out there in our communities, the very people that this government says they're supposed to be representing.
Jeff, you wanted to jump in?
Sure. Over the summer, Mr. Morneau was conducting a jihad against small business, accusing them of taking unfair advantage of tax loopholes. Then it turns out that, first, Mr. Morneau has a numbered company in Alberta. I wonder if that has anything to do with lower tax rates in Alberta. Second, it was discovered that he forgot to report Chateau Morneau in France. Chateau Morneau is owned by a numbered company. We go on from there. This is the same minister who's been attacking individuals who operate small businesses in this country for taking advantage of loopholes when it appears he is doing exactly the same thing. Why did he not obey the spirit of the law and put his holdings in a blind trust. And finally, to my Liberal colleague, Mary Dawson made a recommendation to the previous government, which unfortunately was not acted upon, but it stands for the current government to close the loophole. Why has that not been done?
By the way, the NDP brought forward a motion last week to close said loophole, and the Liberal government refused to support it. And now we find out that more ministers may be benefiting.
So hyperbole being what it is, I would encourage the viewers to look at the wording of that NDP motion, and they can come to their own conclusions about why the government would not have voted in favor of it. I would also say that the minister who Jeff has just referenced as having these various holdings is also the minister who has sought and received the counsel of the Ethics Commissioner, as have his counterparts. Some of them will be taking different actions now, but everyone has acted with the counsel and with the advice of the Ethics Commissioner to this point.
Well, Colin, can I ask you,
will the loophole be changed?
Do you think, well, first of all, do you think that Bill Morneau, Colin, is following the spirit of the law?
Well, I think every newly elected member of Parliament looks to the officers of Parliament for their advice and their counsel when it comes to dealing with their personal and professional affairs. Obviously, the Ethics Commissioner provided advice to the minister that now folks are deeming to be insufficient. The minister, despite being referred to as something much less than it is, the minister has committed to contributing all $5 million, perhaps, of the earnings he's received from the time he's been in minister on his holdings to charitable. A $5 million charitable donation.
Which he'll get a nice tax benefit from.
Well, a $5 million charitable donation is not something that we generally would smirk at.
Well, why not change?
I guess you'll get a deduction.
Why not change the loophole, Colin? Why not change this law so that this kind of thing cannot happen again?
Well, I think the PMO has been clear that they've instructed members to work with the Office of the Ethics Commissioner. I think they will also be speaking with the Office of the Ethics Commissioner. But at this moment in time, members have been following the rules as they exist.
But the Prime Minister, and to be fair, I think the Prime Minister actually asked for a higher standard from his ministers, and Morneau and others have chosen a different path. Why is that? And why will this government not close that loophole? In whose interest does it serve? And I think that's the question that a lot of people are asking today.
Jeff?
Well, look, at the end of the day, this is all about the hypocrisy of the Trudeau cabinet, Mr. Trudeau himself, and especially Mr. Morneau. This is a government that went after small businesses across the country over the alleged use of tax loopholes. That is exactly what Mr. Morneau is doing and has been caught at, and that apparently is also what 3 or 4 of his cabinet colleagues are also doing. This is hypocrisy.
What kind of damage does it do, Merritt, do you think, to the Liberal brand for Canadians out there following this story?
Well, I think it causes a lot of Canadians to lose some trust in the government, and particularly, in the finance minister, where we really need to have a great deal of trust. We have a government that wants to move forward on, has made numerous promises, some of which they're now backtracking on or saying they're not going to move as quickly on, like infrastructure. And I think it causes Canadians to question what their actual motives are here. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Morneau both are people of some significant means. They're wealthy individuals. And I think that for a lot of Canadians, they've been looking for signs that they could understand what it really means. And the Liberals have said, and the Prime Minister has said, he's there fighting for the little guy, for the middle class. This puts a pretty big gap between those wealthy ministers and the Prime Minister and your average Canadian.
So I think it's probably important, Todd, just to point out that in the midst of all of this, the Minister of Finance was able to present a fall economic update last week that shows the economy is growing under this government, that shows an increase in the Canada Child Benefit, and that shows really the country is continuing to progress along the lines that the Minister, the Prime Minister, and those in the Liberal team have been promising since election. But
unfortunately, nobody's really paying all that much attention to it because of these issues that are raising.
That's right.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to the 3 of you, though, Merritt, Jeff, and Colin. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.